For almost 2 decades now, you have been a member of a Youth Aliyah minyan. During these fateful years, over 50,000 despairing Jewish boys and girls have been transported to Israel, where Youth Aliyah has clothed them, sheltered them, and rehabilitated them until they were ready to take their places as free citizens in the world's newest democracy. You feel great pride in this wonderful work, for your efforts and your contributions have been a part of it. Yet you have taken so much on faith. Now you want to travel to Israel to see for yourself what Youth Aliyah has accomplished and what still remains ahead. And so you make your trip, traveling eastward until the sunrise over Mount Carmel tells you that you have finally reached the promised land. Haifa Harbor, as seen through the ship's rigging, is a bustling place this bright morning. Commerce, after thousands of years, has once more returned to this ancient crossroads of civilization. The great ships of the world now steam proudly up, bringing goods and visitors, and departing with products and merchandise. And, you reflect proudly, the wandering Jew now has a destination and a destiny. The people of Israel have come from all the lands of the earth, bearing with them a bewildering variety of customs and languages. They have in common, however, the great traditions and ethics of the Jewish past. It is this community of ideas and practices that has become the state of Israel. You are welcomed to Israel by Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion. A modern Messiah, he is part prophet, part politician, thus symbolizing the role his Israel must play among the United Nations. Another welcome awaits you now from the representatives of Hadassah. The ladies realize that your time is limited and that you are eager to see as much as you can. So you have been provided with a beach wagon to tour the country, not only viewing the work of Youth Aliyah, but learning to understand Israel's entire refugee problem. A small Israeli helps wish you Godspeed, a hopeful omen of the experiences to follow. These will begin very shortly at Lydda Airport, where many of the immigrants are flown in. Because of Israel's location between the ocean and hostile Arab lands, refugees must come by sea or air. You remember, for instance, Operation Magic Carpet, the dramatic airlift that rescued almost 50,000 Yemenite Jews. And now the beach wagon brings you to Lydda Airport, and this handsome policeman tells you that planes have just arrived from Iraq and Iran on a new airlift, Operation Alibaba. You glimpse the newcomers, some transfigured, others unable to fathom yet what freedom will mean. And now they tumble out, hungry, often airsick, looking like creatures from the Arabian Nights. It's a colorful sight, but scarcely a pretty one. Yet you watch and wonder. Some of these people may have been well-to-do or even wealthy, but you can't tell now, for they are all penniless, their goods and money pillaged by the Arabs. All they own in the world is what they've managed to carry with them, the rags and scraps on their backs, the children in their arms. They are tired and hungry after their long, arduous trip. Solicitous rescue workers see to it that they are fed immediately and allowed to rest up before the next stage of their journey. You walk among them and you ponder. How much work, how much skilled effort will be needed to bridge the centuries, to take these representatives of the Middle Ages and assimilate them into a progressive Western civilization. Every age and condition of health is represented. This child was but 20 days old. How much of life remains for this old woman? Yet everyone is treated with attention and solicitude. For to the Jew, every human life has value and meaning. You don't miracle catches your eye. Who knows what precious possessions were left behind to make room for this little bundle? And what is it? An ancient parchment worth little or nothing in material terms, but to these people it is still their greatest treasure, their faith, their law, their Torah. This is their assurance that they will be worthy of the land that has redeemed them. But for most of them, a vast amount of rehabilitation lies ahead. Now they swing aboard the trucks that will bring them to the reception center. Every immigrant is taken immediately to a reception camp such as this one. Here these victims of man's oppression spend their first day in Israel. For some of them, the first day they have ever known that is free from hunger and fear. Unfortunately, despite the heroic efforts of the government, these centers are desperately limited. Tents, shabby and weather-beaten, serve as housing, and even these are desperately overcrowded. Power and hygienic facilities are primitive. Health standards are maintained only because the Israeli army, which is in charge of these camps, insists on strict cleanliness. Indeed, some of these folk must be taught the art of washing. And the clothing. A sort of weird costume ball unfolds in front of you, amusing, bizarre, pathetic. Many refugees have nothing to put on their backs but old garments sent to Israel as gifts and pressed into immediate use. During his time here, each person is carefully screened by doctors and psychiatrists. The sick or infirm are sent to hospitals or institutions. Others undergo placement tests, so they may be assigned to work where they will be happy and useful. And so the next stage in their journey comes about. Each person is sent to an appropriate work camp. This is Tira, oldest of the work camps and also the best equipped, though the houses are little more than shacks. Each of these units shelters a family up to 5 persons, an example of the prevalent housing shortage. And even here, tents are needed to augment the housing. In these work camps, the immigrant is given a trade and work to sustain his self-respect. But a vast amount of rehabilitation is still needed. This requires so much time, trained personnel, and equipment, all in tragically short supply. Yet the need must be met if Israel is to continue its great humanitarian program. And the funds must come from outside Israel. Many Israeli women, under the auspices of Hadassah, do volunteer work as teachers and nurses, endeavoring to look after the youngsters while their parents establish themselves. If it had the means, Hadassah would do even more. And even now there are 100,000 additional children desperate to enter Israel. These little children are solemnly engaged in learning how to play. Until now, you realize, they have probably been little more than hunted creatures. Watching them, noticing the shabby clothing and pitiful shoes, you wonder whether you have really done enough. Yet everywhere, despite hardships, hope and anticipation are found. Where else in a world trembling on self-destruction could you see the affirmative principles of growth and progress? Traveling through the Galilee, you admire the beautiful landscape. And though the land is barren, you know that forests will soon arise in Zion, and the rocks give way to cultivated fields. Indeed, the process is even now underway. A group of Polish Jews from a nearby work camp is planting trees. Laughingly, you ask to see your tree, the one you purchased through the Jewish National Fund. Here it is, they say, and surely this is your very own tree. At Rosh Pina, in the Lake Chula area, you visit this little military cemetery, a tragic reminder that Jewish men and women had to die to pay the price of freedom. That they did not die in vain is demonstrated by this group of Yemenites working on the roads. The Yemenites are noted for their infectious gaiety. As you drive up, they insist on demonstrating their gratitude towards Americans by a fascinating native dance. They are dancing now about another memorial to fallen Jews, symbolizing once more the sacrifice and its fulfillment. The race that dies that it may live. Exciting as it is, you must leave, however, for you're about to start your tour of the Youth Aliyah establishments, starting at the Hans Beith Reception Center. India, when the British ruled that great subcontinent, was famous as the source of fabulous wealth. Here comes a shipment from India now, but no truckload of jewels could be as valuable. These youngsters have just arrived from Bombay and Calcutta, complete with broad Oxford accents. Many of these children are second-generation refugees. Their parents fled from Hitler, and they are escaping the famine and tensions of India. Watching them pile out of the trucks and race forward, you are reminded again of the resilience of youth. Unlike the older immigrants, they have no apprehensions. Life in Israel will be a wondrous adventure, and they are eager to get underway. First, of course, they must explore and meet all their new brothers and sisters. And what a variety there are, to be sure. Here are 3 children from Romania. This fellow has recently arrived from Morocco. A girl from India. Hungary was the birthplace of these twins and their brother. Others come from Poland, China, Greece, the Near East, everywhere. Each group has its own language and customs, its own games and dances. This young lady may someday be a great ballerina. She's followed on stage by a less skillful, but equally enthusiastic ensemble. But there is serious work to be accomplished at Hans Beith. The precious stores of clothing and bedding must be allotted. The specialists must screen each child, attend to his needs, map his future. And here, all cultural differences forgotten, they learn the hora, the national dance of Israel, foreshadowing the days when they must all cling together, work together, and build together. They depart from Hans Beith in smaller groups. Some will go to children's villages, some to kibbutzim, some to agricultural or trade schools. This particular contingent is heading for the junior Hadassah village of Mayor Shveya, and you, almost as enthusiastic yourself, follow them to their new home. Naturally, there is excitement when you arrive. Israel is the land of the spontaneous welcome. Mayor Shveya lives up to that tradition, and then some. No sooner does he see you than every child in the village drops whatever he's doing and engages in some impromptu demonstration of his excitement and affection. They sing, they dance, they crowd about you asking questions, or perhaps they wave shyly to you from behind a hedge. The executive secretary of the village explains the function of Mayor Shveya. It is an agricultural training village supported by Junior Hadassah, where 350 youngsters learn the science and skills of farming. You pause in front of the little post office to admire the luxuriant foliage. Everywhere, in fact, the profusion of flowers and shrubbery give colorful evidence that the children are encouraged in their love of nature and of beauty. Minds thus trained are healthy minds, which, as a general rule, lead to healthy bodies. And indeed, you will go far before you meet with sturdier, more attractive youngsters than these. Despite grave shortages, particularly in housing, the village boasts this beautiful modern schoolhouse, a concrete example of the importance which education enjoys in the ancient Jewish tradition. All the children attend, mastering history, geography, English, Hebrew, and a variety of other subjects. Half their day is spent in this traditional schooling, the other half being devoted to the practical sciences of agriculture, animal care, and the maintenance of farm machinery. Above everything else, the children learn self-government. The natural leaders among them are entrusted with the responsibility for the operation of the village. These fine young men, who already show a capacity for leadership, assign the entire day's work for the whole village. Thus, Israel builds for the future by preparing the men and women who must make the eventual decision. Once more on the road, you admire the view, no longer a rock-strewn wilderness, but a blooming landscape, evidence of the energy that has transformed the desert. You might almost believe yourself in New England, except for the abundance of cactus. In contrast to Mayor Shveya, many of the Youth Aliyah establishments are part of a kibbutz, which is responsible for the welfare of the children. You meet these appealing youngsters in Daganya, located in the Jordan Valley near the south shore of the Sea of Galilee. Daganya, founded in 1909, is the oldest of the kibbutzim and one of the most beautiful. Here, during the war, the Syrian thrust was battered back. Not, you remind yourself, that Israel might dominate her neighbors, but simply that her people might enjoy the fruits of peace and democracy, rewards amply demonstrated in these sleepy little faces. In another children's village, you see a few of the lovely little houses built by Hadassah for Youth Aliyah. Not all Youth Aliyah children are refugees. Some, such as this little fellow, are war orphans. At last, it would seem, Cantor has sons. Heading now for the agricultural school at Magdiel, you pass an area cultivated by Jews and Arabs alike. This is an Arab field, and you observe the many rocks where the Arabs tilled their fields as their ancestors before them, plowing through the stones and boulders. Watching this fellow, you realize that the Jews, victims of intolerance elsewhere in the world, will allow no discrimination here. The Arabs who choose to live in Israel have equal rights with their Jewish neighbors. Many of them appreciate it and are quick to offer you their hospitality. You accept it in the spirit in which it is given. A Jewish field now appears, and you see the contrast. The rocks here have been cleared away and piled up. About 10 o'clock of a bright Mediterranean day, you arrive at Magdiel, another Youth Aliyah agricultural village. At Mayor Shveya, you had learned how these villages are administered. Now you are eager to see the children as they actually train for their career on the soil. This is a wish easily granted, for all the children whom you see busily working about you are engaged in one phase or another of agricultural life. No doubt many of these children, before their admission to Israel, would have been terrified at the mere sight of such rural phenomena as cows or goats or lambs. But just look at them now. Indeed, there seems to be a slight problem in keeping the children from making pets of the livestock. But life is not all work at these Youth Aliyah establishments. Watching the children romp about in their games, or talking to the little fellows who follow you about, you suddenly realize that they are under no stern discipline. No one ever seems to reprimand them, yet more unspoiled, better adjusted little folk you have never seen. As one of their instructors tells you when you ask him about this matter, we keep the children busy and happy. They know which way they're headed, so there's never any need to push them. Near Negba, at the gateway to the Negev, you visit this silent monument to the wrath of free men provoked. This great police station, formerly British, was garrisoned by 2,000 Egyptian troops who were literally blasted out by a handful of Jews. But the village of Negba was itself completely destroyed in the fighting, and the people returned to find their homes in ruins. So they immediately set about to reconstruct, to erect in steel and concrete a living proof that the light of freedom, though temporarily eclipsed by deceit and fraud, will yet emerge to burn higher and brighter. Upon entering the kibbutz itself, you are greeted by little groups of village youngsters. Their parents are off in the fields or working in the shops, and the little people are entrusted to their teachers during the daylight hours. And now you visit members of the kibbutz. Like Negba, these newcomers have seen their lives ostensibly destroyed, yet they live once more in freedom. Negba includes a Youth Aliyah settlement. As you head towards it, you meet some of the Youth Aliyah children returning from a hike. The houses in this settlement are the gift of the New Jersey region of Hadassah. Many more are still needed as children pour into Israel. And here are our friends of a few minutes ago. They all have oranges now, and they've even found a pet. The child in the crew cut is a girl newly arrived. The soldier is her brother, who had believed her dead. This very hour, almost by accident, he had found her. You return to Negba proper late in the afternoon and stroll about sightseeing in this fine kibbutz. Finally, however, you must drive away, but not without many backward glances at a simple white water tower that stands for a town rebuilt, a people restored, an ideal undying. Having seen so many strong, healthy children, you almost forget that there is another, sadder side to the picture. This is revealed to you at the Hadassah TB Hospital in Jerusalem, where you see many of the children who were screened out upon their arrival in Israel. Enjoying the beneficent sun on the porch are a group well along in their battle against the dread White Death. With them, as always, is one of the dedicated Hadassah nurses. She tells you a story by now tragically familiar of the lack of beds and equipment and personnel, all so necessary to carry on the fight for health. Inside, you pass through the rows of cribs, each with its little patient, each a little tug at your heart. The spotless, cheerful atmosphere, however, dispels many fears, and the nurses assure you that every child you see will recover. But as Israel accelerates its immigration program more and more, facilities will be imperative. More and more funds must be raised to provide them. Your time in Israel grows short, but before leaving, you must visit Old and New Ben Shemen, two of the finest of the Youth Aliyah villages. This is Old Ben Shemen. During the war, the children were evacuated from here to New Ben Shemen at Kfar on the Mediterranean. Following Israel's victory, however, the older children were reestablished here. A new and growing part of Old Ben Shemen is the Samuel A. Elliott Children's Village, named for the minister who was the founder and first president of Children to Palestine, a group founded in 1943 by Christians anxious to cooperate with Youth Aliyah for the rescue and rehabilitation of Jewish children victims of persecution. Today, hundreds of young people are housed in the scores of buildings built, restored, or repaired by these fine people. At New Ben Shemen, you meet Dr. Siegfried Lehmann, world-renowned psychiatrist and child specialist, and the founder of both Ben Shemen. In fact, these wonderful camps may be said to reflect his extraordinary personality and wisdom. The children, you quickly see, adore him. Among the many charges of the remarkable Dr. Lehmann are some of the more difficult children, the confused, the neurotic, even the antisocial. Each of them is taught to feel that he is needed and important, that he has a responsibility to fulfill. Many of them are in charge of something all their own, something living that grows, and in whose growth they can see their own development. It is rather strange, after all, that a people regarded for 2,000 years as exclusively urban should develop such a love and capacity for farming. It is almost a miracle, this transformation. But miracles require saints and, perhaps in addition, lots of good, hard work. Ben Shemen, like all of Israel, seems well supplied with both. In New Ben Shemen, the children all live in the New England village, in houses that are the gifts of thousands of New Englanders eager to further the humanitarian objectives of Youth Aliyah. Today is a memorable day at Ben Shemen, for several new units are to be dedicated. To you falls the great honor of presenting the scrolls inscribed with the names of the contributors. Your joy is somewhat tempered as you present the first scroll, for this house has been given in loving memory of Dr. Joshua Loaf Liebman, and the scroll signed by a handful of the myriads of people who revered this saintly rabbi, teacher, author, and pioneer in Youth Aliyah work. Each of the new units now being dedicated will provide homes for 10 children and costs $2,500. Some are the gifts of individuals. Others are given by organizations or groups. After the presentation of the scrolls, plaques are affixed to each unit, permanent reminders of the faith and generosity of the donors. And the children of Ben Shemen will grow up in the knowledge that from a great land many seas away, has come a pledge that they will not be forgotten or ever again be left to suffer. Here, all together, they express their gratitude in music. Like explorers of old, you have come to a new shore seeking riches. Here, in this little land of Israel, you have discovered wealth that transcends all material treasures. For all about you, shining with a luster that dims the finest gold, are courage, compassion, faith, dignity, and love. Take these with you, and the people of Israel will be no poorer. But when you do, you also take an obligation. Your hand must follow your heart. You must never forget Israel nor the children who hold her future. Will you forget them? Will you forget Joseph, who has just discovered freedom? Will you forget Esther, who fled the bestial terrors of Romania? Will you forget Deborah, whose every relative was murdered at Dachau? Will you forget Jonathan, or Peter, or Sarah, or Avram? Young Israel is looking towards tomorrow. What they see there must depend on you.